welcome to our unit of Art of the Islamic World. So we're heading over to the Middle East primarily. We're going to look a little bit at Spain, but we're primarily focusing in this region. And so what's interesting about this region is I actually lived in the Middle East for 7 years. I grew up in Saudi Arabia from 1st through 7th grade. I actually taught in Qatar at an international school for several years. So I lived in the Middle East for 9 years total, and then I've traveled through the UAE, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Jordan, Turkey, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan. So, yeah, I'm still an outsider to this religion though, but I will try my best. And so I want to start with looking at our region of modern day Jordan to emphasize how, especially in this upper region of the Middle East, is that we're going to see this really cool mix of all these different cultural influences in our early establishment of Islamic architecture and art. And so we're going to look at Petra, Jordan to help lead us into that. So we're looking at our Silk Trade Route, which we've studied before, and we're going to focus on Jordan, which connects all these major centers: Europe, Egypt, other parts of the Mediterranean Sea, East Asia, Saudi Arabia, etc. And so it's right here, our Silk Trade Route, okay? And we're going to look at Petra for a moment. So Petra had been under the Nabatean Empire, the Roman Empire, later the Islamic. And so we see these little images. You may be familiar with what's called the treasury, but it was an extremely important and very wealthy city, actually. And so little of it has been excavated. There's just mounds that have yet to be discovered where we know there's major architecture under it, etc. Basically only Brown University has uncovered a little bit. And so I went here, which was a really cool experience in 2012, and spent a few days traveling around the city of Petra. Again, so much of it has yet to be uncovered. It's really neat. But let's focus on what's called the treasury. And it was not the treasury, but I want to show how we have these mix of motifs. And so we have Hellenistic motifs, we have these Near East rosettes, we have our Corinthian capitals, which the Romans liked. On the lower level, there were originally 2 Greek gods. This area has been worn away by water. It had water rushing through this wadi for a little bit. And then at the top, you have Amazons, you have victories. Look at our Greek Tholos here. In the center was this goddess that was this mix of this Egyptian and Near East goddess. There's also some Greek influences. So notice just with this architecture, the most prominent architecture when you think of Petra is a mix of all these different regions. It's on the Silk Trade Route. This area had been under different forms of rulership and influenced by many different types of ideas. And so we'll see this mix with our establishment of early Islamic architecture. So here's the extent of our Islamic empire. But let's talk about Islam. So I know that you've watched a video about it, but I just want to reiterate is that essentially Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all are of the Abrahamic tradition. Consider it like this tree, and the trunk is the Abrahamic tradition, and that they have similarities. And so when we're looking at the name of the religion and the followers, key people, holy book, place of worship, and notice how each of them have 3 main sects as well. But Islam stems out of Judaism. So I really realized this when I was in Qatar and I was speaking to one of my friends from Egypt, and we were talking about the story of Moses, and he was talking about, oh, my Moses, and then I was talking about, oh, my Moses, and then we realized, oh, yes, we both have this Moses, is that essentially the beginning of the Torah, the Old Testament, and the Quran have these same stories. They share if you're more familiar with the Old Testament, is they share those stories. And so Islam stems out of that. Muslims see Jesus as a prophet. And so there's a respect for that. Note that in Islam, you may have heard them refer to Allah. So Allah is the Arabic word for God. Again, essentially all three of these religions believe in the same God. And so the trunk of them all are of this Abrahamic religion and tradition. And so when we're looking at Islam, we need to consider the 5 pillars of Islam. So you have Shahada, the profession of faith, Salah, prayer, 5 times a day toward Mecca. So if you're in the Islamic world, like I grew up hearing the prayer 5 times a day, they're set over these loudspeakers from the mosques. And so no matter where you are in the world, 5 times a day, you would pray toward Mecca. Some fasting during the daylight hours of the holy month of Ramadan, zakat, almsgiving, and the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca, and where you would circumambulate the Kaaba, the most holy site in Islam. So we're going to head to Mecca. Now, look at it. We're heading to Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, where Muhammad is from. And so this is the holiest site in Mecca, in Islam. And what we're looking at is the structure of the Kaaba. So I lived in Saudi Arabia for 7 years, but I never visited Mecca because only Muslims are allowed to enter this sacred city. It's actually even a no-fly zone. You can't fly over it because non-Muslims aren't allowed in this area. And so let me back up. So Muhammad is from Saudi Arabia. He's not from Mecca, but Mecca was an important site even before the establishment of Islam. It was an important caravan route. There was an oasis here. So remember, we are in a desert region. So the most important natural element is water. And so you have these oases throughout this region. And so this would be where cities would be established, etc. So we don't have rivers like what we've seen with the other civilizations that we've studied, but we have what's called an oasis. And so there's this constant warfare of taking over this oasis so that you and your loved ones can survive, etc. And so what happens is that, or part of the establishment of Mecca being a holy site, is that there's a belief in Islam that at one point Abraham and Ishmael came to this region and that they built this original structure, or built the original structure that was in this spot. But when Ishmael's family died, the inhabitants reverted to paganism. And so later, in 629, the Prophet Muhammad conquered this city. And so he converted the people to the new religion of Islam. And he got rid of all these idols. And he declared it the center of Muslim pilgrimage. And so it was dedicated to Allah. And so here we have the most important site in Islam. It's located in what's now this great mosque. And as you can see, here is when we have, especially during the Ramadan, holy month of Ramadan, where we have this pilgrimage as people circumambulate the Kaaba, this structure covered in this black cloth and gold calligraphy. And so in Islam, there aren't figures in art. But what we do see oftentimes is this beautiful Arabic calligraphy where we see scriptures from the Quran, the holy book of Islam. And so we see that here, and just notice how Arabic really lends itself to this beautiful calligraphy. And the gold stands out against this beautiful black, but notice how also the black cloth has this beautiful calligraphy as well, with holy scriptures. And so people are to circumambulate the Kaaba 7 times. And this is where, no matter where you are in the world, as a Muslim, you would pray in the direction of the Kaaba at Mecca. Another aspect of this is there's a black stone within the Kaaba, and it is believed to be a meteorite, but this really designates this holy spot where Abraham and Ishmael had traveled to and had established this area as a sacred site for later the religion of Islam, which stems out of the Abrahamic tradition. So circumambulation, which we see across all these religions across the globe. Here we have the Kaaba. So let's head on over to modern day Jerusalem, Palestine, where we're looking at the Dome of the Rock. So as you likely know, this is a contentious region where Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all claim descendancy from this region. And so we're looking at the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And this had originally been, well, let's start with the conquering. So in 638, the Umayyad dynasty captured Jerusalem from the Byzantines, which we'll study with our early Christian art, the Byzantine Empire. And so just like all these other major powers that we've studied across time, is when you are declaring your own new power, you likely destroy remnants in art and architecture of the previous rulers to establish your authority. And so the same case here is we have this establishment of this Islamic building, which is a shrine, not a mosque, to really define the new culture. It marked the coming of this new religion to the city, the establishment of Islam in this region, in an area that was already sacred to Jews and Christians. And so again, a story of time that we've seen again and again. So it's this architectural tribute to the triumph of Islam. So it holds significance as a sacred site to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. So you also watched a video about the geometry of Islamic art and then this beautiful meditative patterns that we see to help us to almost come into this more religious mindset. And so we see that throughout the Dome of the Rock as well. There's mathematical symmetry. We'll later study Islamic's golden age, where they were made profound discoveries with the sciences and mathematics, etc. And so let's head into the inside. So again, we see this repeating pattern, this tessellation, this sacred geometry throughout this structure. We see these floral elements, and we see gold. So gold had been used by the Byzantines to create this idea of the heavens. There's many, we've talked about this before, about gold being associated with this heavenly realm. It's beautiful, it's valuable, and so we see that utilized throughout this structure as well. And these floral motifs to represent paradise. Again, come back to our origin of Islam in Saudi Arabia. It's a desert region, so your ideal landscape living in a desert would be this luscious garden area. And so the ideas of paradise of being this lush garden are also seen in art with these floral motifs. But the reason why these three main religions claim this site is because it's believed to be the site of the Temple of Solomon. This is referred to as the noble enclosure, so right in the center. And so we're familiar with this if you think back to when we were studying ancient Roman art with our Arch of Titus and how he had sacked the city of Jerusalem and destroyed the Temple of Solomon in 70 AD. We looked at this relief of his soldiers bringing back the spoils from this temple. And what we're looking at here is the foundation, believed to be the foundation of this temple. It's also important because it's described as the spot of Adam's grave, or where Abraham prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac. In terms of Islam, it's also believed to be the site where Muhammad descended up to the heavens and returned back to Mecca, called the Miraj. And so this is an important site for all three of these religions. So here we have again this gold, these floral motifs, the tessellation of these repeating patterns, and we have this calligraphy. And these images of paradise throughout, this gold, heavenly reminder. So here we have the Dome of the Rock. Now with the exterior, note that a symbol in Islam, and we saw this on the slide where I had the three main religions, is there's this association with the crescent moon or the moon. And so we see that at the top of here. And these tiles are actually a later addition. Yeah, same with the gold dome. But either way, it's this beautiful architecture. So the dome should be a little familiar because this is reflective of the Roman influence on this region. So this had been conquered by a Roman leader in 70 AD, a Roman emperor, and so we see this Roman influence. And what does this remind you of? Hopefully the Pantheon comes to mind of this dome surrounded by this structure. Okay. So we're going to head on over to Syria, in this region, to talk about the establishment of mosques. So here's the Umayyad Mosque, one of the oldest mosques, Damascus, Syria, which prior to Islamic rule, it had been a Roman region and then a Byzantine region. And if you'll notice, the layout of this structure is perhaps familiar because it is based off of the Roman Forum. So if we come back to Trajan's Forum, we have this basilica, we have these covered walkways, these porticos surrounding this courtyard. In the center was this equestrian statue. And so we have that same layout here where we have this covered portico, we have the courtyard, and we have what's based off of this idea of the basilica. And so the original mosque is influenced by the Roman Empire. This region was was under the Roman Empire for an extensive period of time. So there are Roman structures throughout it. So these architects are looking to that in the creation of their own. And so again, this beautiful geometry, you could get lost in it. Consider how we saw it's similar to the idea of like the mandala in Buddhist art, and how by looking at this, it's even if you aren't religious, it's calming. You can appreciate it, but it helps you to enter this state of this calm, almost like meditative state to be able to worship your religion. You'll remember from the video that here we have these images of paradise, this gold and this beautiful floral motifs here. So this is in our central courtyard. And again, influenced by the Roman forums. These images of paradise. Umayyad Mosque. Now, I'm going to upload a PDF version of the following slides of the mosque because you need to know and understand the basic layout. So there's the Hippo-style mosque, the Awan-style mosque, and the centrally planned mosque. But let's talk about some of the basics. So you're in this sacred zone. There's a wall around it. And let's look at our san. This is our courtyard. It's the formal courtyard. Consider how this mimics our idea of that courtyard in the Roman forums. And there's this covered arcade or portico that surrounds it for you to walk around and circumambulating. And in the center here, we see these fountains. There's also, when we look inside the interior of these mosques, we need to talk about the importance of the Qibla wall. So remember, Mecca and the Kaaba is the most important site in all of Islam, and so when you pray 5 times a day, you would turn toward Mecca. Well, which direction to turn? Well, within a mosque, there will be a defined Qibla wall, and the mihrab is this niche, which is often much more decorative, or it will have scriptures around it, and so you'll know which way to face. Here's some other examples. The minbar is the pulpit where the imam, the leader of prayers, will pray, deliver sermons. Heading back to our san, the reason for these fountains, and even on the exterior, is the idea of wudu and this ritual purifying of washing. You may remember, I believe I briefly mentioned that with Hinduism as well. But water across many religions, again, I mean, we need it for survival, so it's sacred in that regard. But this idea of cleansing with water or holy water or purification is an important element in many religions. And so you would clean yourself and take off your shoes before entering the prayer hall. Another element of mosque is the minaret. It's this tall, slender tower. And consider how this really marks that this is an Islamic structure, and thus an Islamic power is in charge of this region. So they vary according to the region which they're established, but again, so it's religious as well as political. In modern day times, you would hear or even in ancient times, you would hear the call to prayer from up here. Now it's more speakers are put up here. And we've already talked about hippo-style halls. And so the earliest structures were these hippo-style halls in this basilica-type format. So they were already established. They're already in the regions in which Islam has conquered. But they also mimic the idea of the oasis, of these trees in which the Prophet Muhammad had established. Essentially, as the first mosque was in his own courtyard, was in his own oasis with these trees. So initially they were all hippo style. Then in the 11th century we have the 401 style that's established. And later we have the centrally planned mosque under the Byzantine, or first established by Byzantine churches, and then the Ottoman Empire conquered the Byzantine area, and so they utilized that same plan for Islam. Okay, so let's head on over to Iran, and we're going to look at the Great Mosque in Iran. So this is the largest and oldest congregational or Friday mosque in Iran. The site was originally a Christian church, it then became a mosque, and became much larger. It's the focal point of the city. This is the place where it unites the community. Right around it are markets, so it's this economic hub, it's the center, and so it brings people to pray away from the busy streets. It unites the community. It's in the heart of the city. It's the center for gathering. So it's not just a mere space for prayer, for sermons. There's also commercial activity surrounding it it draws people in away from the noise of the city. And so if we're looking at the roof, this aerial view, you can see these bumps are the hippo-style hall. So here was the original hippo-style hall, as all mosques were. Already established architecture. So we're looking at this area right here. Here is the beautifully decorative it is, in which you would face toward during prayer. Here we're looking out into the Salon, the courtyard, where we see this main view of the South Awan with these minarets. So an Awan is this vaulted space. This was later established, so this is a later addition. And it had already been utilized in Persian architecture, secular architecture. And so then in this region, they're incorporating this already established architecture into Islamic architecture. So the Awan. There would be 4 of them surrounding the courtyard. It's this monumental, barrel vaulted hall, cut down the center essentially. This more decorative one faces Mecca. The mosaics are actually a later addition, so not from our time period. And so the mukurnas are these cusped niches, which is often described as a honeycomb vaulting. And sort of the tessellation throughout. I mean, just the amount of time and skill that went into creating all these tiny details. Just beautiful. Stepping out into the courtyard. And we see this idea of this reminder of wudu, of purification, the importance of water. Come back to the origin of Islam in this desert region. And here's our great mosque. And there is the end of early Islamic art. And we'll continue tomorrow looking at our golden age.